Hey everyone, welcome back to the Jasmine Ortiz Show. You're here with Jasmine Ortiz and Jordy Polycarp. Our topic this week is being a multi-hyphenate creative. What this means to us is basically being a creative person, like an artist, songwriter, singer, musician, while also pursuing other aspects of that career like entrepreneurship or audio engineering, which we're definitely going to talk a lot about later with our guest this week, Aiden Smith. So to get right into it, Jordy, we're going to start out with some Hollywood highlights. First of all, happy Pride Month. Very
Yay.
happy that it's Pride Month. Also, just love June because my birthday is in like 10 days. So
Gemini
exciting.
season.
Gemini season. So, yeah, lots of interesting and fun things happening with Pride Month this year. First of all, in anticipation of Pride Month, also just in general, Billie Eilish released her newest album, and on it, very iconic song called Lunch.
hmm
I mean, if you've heard the song, I think you can basically garner what it's about. But I love that Billie has been feeling more and more comfortable with expressing her queer identity very openly and doing so in such a mainstream way. And I love that for her because I think it needs to be said, it needs to be appreciated.
Yeah, I've been loving it a lot. The whole album itself, Hit Me Hard and Soft, has been a really interesting listen, and people have been talking about how it's kind of like a new form album in the way that it's shorter than a lot of other ones have been lately and very like quick to release with no singles. But especially for this song, I think Billie Eilish is one person who's a huge artist in our generation who wasn't necessarily considered a queer artist because I guess
Yeah.
she wasn't out for a really long time. And then also the way that she came out was very much like she said she didn't really realize what she was saying at the time. Not that it mattered necessarily, but I think that just the way that her overall branding and persona has been for a really long time and is right now, it's interesting to see like femme queer artists just kind of existing in a way that doesn't feel like, I don't know. So even though the song itself isn't like technically explicit, it's like very clear about what the subject matter is. But I also still feel like as a queer woman, it's still very like normal, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
Like I feel like this is how a lot of like, I don't know, just like I feel like so much of our generation are like queer femmes overall, and like this is how we talk to our friends and things like that. So but I don't think that like there's a lot of music that describes it in this way.
Hmm.
And I think there tends to be a lot of emphasis on like if we're talking about gay relationships, it has to be like this like super dramatic love story and things like that. I guess because like past artists don't want to like cheapen the experience or want it to like uplift the community and things like that. But I'm glad we have a song that's just like fun. And
Yeah.
there are other ones like that. She's not like the first queer artist, but like making sure that like I don't know the way that she has managed to do it in a way that just kind of like dropped it into the mainstream. I think is really interesting to see, and I hope she keeps doing that.
Yeah, I agree. And one song that this draws back to for me a lot is Slumber Party by Ash Nico. And I adore that song. I think it's just so iconic and it expresses a lot of what queer young women experience growing up. It's like the
hmm
feelings and the thoughts and things like that of how you interact with your friends and then how that might, explore romantic or sexual attraction as well. So I think Ash Nico did a really great job doing that in that song, but also that song was released before she was such a top mainstream artist like she is now. And she still doesn't have the exact reach that Billie Eilish has had for the better half of this last decade. So I think an artist like Billie doing it specifically has a lot of meaning behind it because, like you said, it just automatically puts her in the forefront of pop culture, in the forefront of what people are listening to. So I think it's a healthy exposure for anyone who relates to this song to finally hear themselves represented.
100%. I think it's really well done. Also, it's just like a really fun song, but still manages to be very like relaxed in a way, which she always embodies. So Well done.
And it's like just so, it's such a bop. Like you can just sing along, like dance around. I feel like it's a fun, happy vibe, which I love. And it
Mm-hmm.
expresses how it feels to have this like burning crush for someone, regardless of your sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
So also another artist that's breaking down these barriers is Young Miko. She's a queer artist in the reggaeton Latin community, and I love that in her music she's doing something very similar to both Billie and Ashniko in, you know, talking about exactly how and why she's into the girls that she's into. And I think that's an important marker because I feel like that's something that a lot of queer women have not had the liberty to express in their music before.
Yeah, I love Young Miko. I all her music videos and like I've seen so many of her live performances, and I feel like I'm glad that like the music community, or at least especially like reggaeton community, has somebody who is queer and is also femme, because I feel like a lot of the like general like hip hop pop community, whenever you have someone who's gay and like a rapper or kind of like hip hop singer or anything like that, they always end up getting masculinized in a certain
Mm-hmm.
way. Like I
Yeah.
feel like they're either their label or whoever kind of pushes them in a way that's like they're still like kind of a misogynist in their music and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad at least that like from what I have like heard and understood of her lyrics and like read through them, I feel like the way that she's going about it is still very much like she clearly likes women, but it doesn't feel disrespectful in the way that like other types of music do, which I'm at least glad for.
And I even feel like, honestly, if she was being a little disrespectful, why wouldn't she be allowed to? As
Mm.
opposed to like a man being super disrespectful about women in his songs. Not saying that it makes it wrong or right, but if a man can do it about a woman he's interested in, I feel like a woman should be even more entitled to.
Yeah.
Like be, and I don't mean degrading. What I mean is like be like nasty in the details, you know, like in that kind of fun exhibitionist sort of way. I feel like she should be totally entitled to that. And in a way, Classy 101 does that,
Hmm.
sort of. And I really love the details that she inserts, but then doesn't give like any real explicitness. So you're just kind of left to run with your imagination about what she's talking about. And I think the lyrics are really clever and fun. Um, Kind of similar to like Billie Eilish's Lunch in concept, which like iconic. And then what's funny to me is how Fade comes in and he's just like, yeah, I'm into that girl too. And he's just like backing her up, which is so funny. But like you kind of can tell Young Miko is the protagonist in this song. Like she's the one who's actually going to get the girl.
Hmm. I think
And I love that.
it's a really interesting thing too, because I feel like there's so often like the trope of like the lesbian and the straight guy being like best friends. And I feel like it's I'm enjoying seeing it in a way that's like not um like like pitting them against each other, but in like a fun way,
Mm-hmm.
and not in a way that feels like creepy or like predatory or things like that, because I feel like that does
Yeah,
often happen, at least in like film and TV. I feel like that's a lot of what we see from that kind of like duo, but I do
true.
like it in music because I feel like it it makes it kind of like she's very clearly like the one that's going to get the girl in that way, like you said. So I kind of
Yeah.
appreciate that,
And it
and
feels
I
like they're
just
just
love it.
genuinely like besties, like in
Yeah.
the way that you and I would talk about people we're interested in or
Hmm.
people that we find attractive. It feels like they're doing the same thing, which I think is really relatable.
Yeah, word.
Also, like in the Latin community, I think breaking down those gender barriers and barriers within the LGBT community in Latin music has been really important. For example, while Bad Bunny does not identify as queer, his breaking of like the masculinity trope, so to speak, or like the hypermasculinity in reggaeton music from a man, the fact that he's worn skirts, the fact that he's painted his nails, the fact that he's kissed male backup dancers, clearly like there's some fluidity in his expression, and I think that's really important to see from a man as well, because there's been so much rigidity and machismo in the Latin community for decades that seeing someone feel empowered enough in his own platform to actually express himself in that way, whether or not it has anything to do with his sexuality, even just how he presents as a person.
Yeah, I like seeing it a lot from Bad Bunny as well. I feel like overall I feel like being a person of color and being a man, it automatically puts them in this kind of box of having to be hyper masculine. And I feel like we as a society deserve less of that because it's only reinforcing these like unrealistic ideals or like rigid rules on like what people should act like. And I feel like especially for artists, they should be allowed to express themselves however they see fit, but they are also the tastemakers and like the people who are who are supposed to move the culture. And so I feel like somebody as popular as Bad Bunny and like so in the mainstream, I feel like I'm glad to see it from him because I'm like, if anybody was gonna do it, it would have been him for this.
And I think challenging that machismo specifically from a Puerto Rican man is really integral to pushing the culture forward. Because a lot of times, like when you grow up in certain community and it feels very insular, the views that are being projected onto you, it can feel so hard to return back to that community in your new form, if that makes sense. Like, even in a much smaller scale, like when I go back to my hometown, I mean, I didn't have any like dramatic, crazy, transformation, but I do feel like a whole different person
Mm-hmm.
given my experience and my influences from living in Miami and then living and traveling in Latin America. So then going back to my hometown, it feels like there is a slight bit more of a disconnect because I don't relate 100% to the people or places that I grew up around anymore. And I think that's something that's beautiful to be said about growth and like moving away from home also.
Yeah, I appreciate that a lot. And I think a lot of people do feel like that, especially in the artist community. I think it also kind of speaks to like how, as a blanket term, like how women or women who like men, what they're attracted to in men nowadays as well. Because I feel like having Bad Bunny as like a figure that generally people are like, yeah, that is a fine man, and like having him have some of these more feminine traits or like fashion sense and things like that, it kind of challenges the idea that women who like men want a man who's hyper masculine or anything like that. And I feel
Yeah.
like a lot of men have a hard time realizing that or understanding that. And they're kind of like, what does everyone see in this guy? I'm like, I see that he's
Secure in himself.
gorgeous and pure and like can make these kinds of decisions without feeling like he has to be one way or the other. I feel
Yeah.
like that's come up a lot in terms of the like we might have talked about this a little bit last week or 2 weeks ago, but like challengers and the like rat boy
Yes,
aesthetic.
oh my god, I saw a whole article about that on Snapchat.
Challengers and the whole rat boy aesthetic. Not the rat boy aesthetic existed before challengers, but just like wanting someone that's a little bit like softer in some ways because we don't really need that kind of like hyper masculine person. Like it doesn't really serve
Yeah.
us anymore.
I feel like my take on it is I like elements of both, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I like elements of a person, of a man being a little bit more in tune with his masculinity, but in a way that feels purposeful. Not because they have something to prove, but because they have like tangible skills that relate to it. Like, oh, I can go like fix your
We're like
car.
chopping wood.
I can go chop wood for you. Like, that's hot. I'm
I'm
sorry.
weak.
That is so hot to me. Like, just being that like manly man, but then also being able to like come home and like be so transparent and like emotionally vulnerable with you and not be afraid of that element of themselves. I think that's like the next generation of hopefully where positive masculinity can go,
Mm-hmm.
because I think masculinity in and of itself has become a term that's a little bit demonized because there's so much toxic masculinity. I think examples of men who display positive masculinity and that balance between the femme and masc sides of themselves are crafting like a way forward for us, because I think there's always going to be a spectrum of men who fall in the more feminine side and men who fall in the more masculine side, but not being afraid to cross that boundary either way, I think, is where we need to head, because women have had to embrace our masculine energy so frequently throughout the past, 40 years probably, just in being huge parts of the workforce, being career driven, having to stand up for ourselves in a society that oftentimes wants to see us fail.
Mhm.
So having to, you know, step away a little bit from our softness has given us this hard outer shell that has allowed us to succeed in this way. And I think men have not embraced the softness that could be allowing them to better support women,
Mhm.
if that
I th-
makes sense.
I think it's also a thing where, like, in terms of how we talk about these terms overall, it I always see people say that, like, they're like women are like living in their masculine, but it's always a negative thing
I
of
don't
like
think it's
it
negative.
like I see women saying that it like it feels like not their true selves, or like it's making them aggressive, or like I don't know, putting on this kind of like front. And I think it's more in terms of like the ways in which that we feel we have to act, not the
Hmm.
way that we want to. But I don't think, I feel like having them as terms of like masculine or feminine is where it creates the divide overall. Because
Hmm.
especially like I feel like especially saying that like a man like being softer is automatically being feminine, it makes them not want to be that at all, because they're like,
That's
well,
so
I'm a
true.
man. Like, and then I think like having these like coined terms for them, I think that overall as a society, I hope that we can just kind of like have all of these different parts of ourselves, but not necessarily assign them to gender, because I think that would make people, and especially men in particular, feel more comfortable um, being able to express those kinds of different sides of themselves and still have it be masculine. Like,
Yeah.
like, can softness also be
Not be
masculine?
masculine. I think it comes down to a personality thing. Like, there are extroverts and introverts, extroverted introverts, introverted extroverts, all sorts of combinations of those things. And I think so often we assign those personality traits to the person's gender identity. And I think that's also where some of the issues come in, because if you're an introverted male, suddenly emasculated, or
Mm.
if you're an extroverted female, all of a sudden you have this masculine presence and you're demanding or bossy, or all those negative connotations that can be associated with that. Ultimately, how you want to represent yourself in this world has a source that's way more internal than just your physical expression.
Most definitely.
I also think this is present in like men's fashion this year. That like balance between those spectrums of whatever we would consider hypermasculinity or femininity or whatever in between, because there's been a huge trend in men's fashion kind of depicting this almost Euro summer look, like with the collared like knit button downs and like the linen trousers and the boat shoes or loafers or whatever. Just this whole evolution of men's fashion suddenly waking up and being like, oh, it's okay. Like, we can take care of ourselves, guys. We are allowed to look good. And it's still masculine and girls will still like us. Actually, they will like us more.
Right. And especially in like Western society, because I feel
Yeah,
like you're
exactly.
like it's the like European fashion sense, or especially the like Asian, like Japanese, Korean fashion sense as well, of having
Yeah.
like looser fit and like wider trousers and things like that. That I feel like they like Western, like Americanized fashion society is finally starting to use, because yeah, they would have
It
gotten
looks good.
bullied from it, or it was called gay or whatever.
Yeah.
That I'm glad at least that they have released themselves from the reins of
Finally. And
terrible
I feel like
fashion.
it genuinely took people like Bad Bunny or Harry Styles breaking down those initial like hyper masculinity barriers and seeing that, oh, we still have a huge female audience that is very much into us. And then all the regular men were just like, oh wow, like take notes, like this is working.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I feel like I've seen people that I would never have expected to paint their nails, and I'm just like, this is awesome. Like, you do that. It's just a form of expression, and I feel like men don't need to be so limited. All right, guys, we're going to move into a quick commercial break before our next segment. Hey, everyone, welcome back. We're on the Jasmine Ortiz show with my lovely co-host, Jordy Polycarp. We're going to go in more depth on our topic of the week, which is being a multi-hyphenate creative. What this means, again, is sort of putting on those different hats when you're creating music, art, content, whatever it is that you choose to do, and also allowing yourself to explore other sides of that.
Yeah, it was an interesting part of our conversation with Aiden as well, because we've talked a lot about how like having gone through music school, we all kind of started in different places with our music education, but at least like somewhere along the way we all kind of gained new skill sets and new interests, and then trying to enter the workforce as a multi-hyphenate creative, it almost makes it harder in a
Yeah.
lot of ways, which sucks. Like going through like job applications and trying to get jobs in like music business, like in the industry and record labels and things like that, and they don't want to hire somebody who is an artist or has been an artist, because I guess they see it as a conflict of interest, or they think that you're gonna leave or something like that. But for a lot of us who spent the time and money getting an education in the industry, it sucks that now it's working against us almost in
Yeah.
a lot of ways. And I think at least like I'm glad that we as an artistic community see the value in each other and all the things that we can do. Like everyone I know who's an artist is like also a DJ and also wants to like work with venues and also wants to start a record label, and there's like all of these hats that we're wearing at all times, and like we're our own social media managers and also are helping other people with their social media. And I think it's at least helping us build this community of people who can help each other out in a lot of ways. But then in the grander scheme of the music industry, it makes it a lot harder for us to find like practical, stable jobs, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I completely agree with what you're saying. One thing that has always terrified me the most about this mentality in the industry is that it feels almost impossible to use the degree that we spent so much time and effort and money to achieve
Mm-hmm.
in any sort of tangible way besides maintaining the skills that we got from it. So, in applying to record label A&R positions or distribution companies, publishing houses, anything like that, the minute that they stumble across a social media page of yours that clearly depicts who you are as an artist, it's almost seen as unprofessional. Like you can't cross that line. And I understand how it can be considered a conflict of interest theoretically. However, I think it's a very closed minded mentality when, in this day and age, it is common knowledge that 99% of people pursuing a career in music and independent artistry cannot sustain themselves off of that alone.
Mm-hmm.
That's just not the reality. So, to prohibit us, especially when we have an education, a formal education in this field, which is the rarity amongst artists, to prohibit us from pursuing other sides of our career because of the fact that we're also pursuing an artistic one feels very small-minded.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, I can play devil's advocate and just see both sides of it, but ultimately I don't think that having, so to speak, a personal endeavor, a personal part of your career, a side hustle, so to speak, takes away from your ability to do the job for the company.
I agree. It's been a really interesting thing seeing like who's getting hired for these jobs, because I think I had also mentioned that like uh in terms of looking through these jobs on LinkedIn, I have a habit of stalking to see who got the jobs, because I
Mhm.
want to see like, because kind of in the way that like LinkedIn lets you have if you have premium, you can see how you rank against other people applying for the same job. I do it, but after I get rejected for the job or ghosted for the job, just to see like what kind of qualifications and things like that these jobs are looking for. And none of them are artists. All of them have been the kind of people who have had like music business internships or who had entirely different fields of study.
Yeah.
for a while, but then started getting internships and things like that. And I guess when it comes to um, stereotypes about artists, I think that we're seen as like flighty or less serious about what we
Unreliable.
do, like unreliable. Like being a creative means that you're just going with the wind and like working when you see fit and things like that, when that is not true, right? Like we kind of have to create these schedules for ourselves, but if anything, I feel like that makes us more fit for these kinds
Disciplined.
of jobs. Yeah, more disciplined, because the fact that it's not built into my life, I have to build it into my life as I see fit
Yeah.
and create a schedule that works for me in order to make certain aspects of my artistry successful. But unfortunately, I guess other people don't really see it that way.
I think the biggest issue, and I understand this from like a logistical business point of view, is that sub subconsciously, the artist, like you or I, might be quote unquote competing with the other artists on a label or publishing company or distributor.
Mm-hmm.
I understand that logic and the way that some artists would definitely try to leverage a corporate position there for their artistic benefit. But I ultimately think, like, if you have any degree of professionalism, you know how to keep those boundaries and separate one from the other. I personally have had internships where I was working for a different roster of artists. I was not one of the artists on that company. And I was able to maintain a professional perspective the entire time because I knew that my reputation in the industry was at stake if I was going to put my foot in my mouth and try to use this as a marketing opportunity for my own career. Now, if it came up organically and someone asked me, "Hey, have you ever made music?" Yeah, I'm an artist, XYZ, but that's not my role here.
Mm-hmm.
And I think drawing that line in the sand is very nuanced and it can feel awkward and uncomfortable. Like, are you lying? Are you withholding information? Ultimately, it to me it's on a need to know basis. If someone asks me specifically, I will not lie to you, but I'm also not there to promote myself. And if I end up forming networking connections with people through this job, that relationship has to evolve and develop organically. And you can, maintain however many connections you want in your immediate music network. I think there's nothing wrong with that, and business professionals, artists alike, do that constantly. There's
Mm-hmm.
nothing wrong or illegal about networking, right? Even though it feels like it sometimes. But if you are holding on to those relationships and waiting for the appropriate time to revisit them in your artist self, that's okay. If you're on the clock at your 9 to 5 handing out like QR codes for your latest release, clearly that's an overstep and a problem. But I think labels don't even want to entertain the fact that that could happen.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times, like you said, I've seen people who get these jobs have no background in music whatsoever, only business or marketing, and I think that is a disservice to the artists on the roster
A hundred
because they
percent.
don't know what it's like.
I agree. I hate seeing that. I feel
Yeah.
like you hear so many times about artists who get signed to a label or a publishing company or anything like that, and feeling like their team doesn't really understand their vision,
Hmm.
or feeling like they're somebody gets laid off and then suddenly your A&R team is entirely different people. And that's easy for companies to do when the people who are working these jobs are music fans to a certain extent, but they don't really get the like day to day like life experience of an artist. And I
Hmm.
think for us, if anything, it would make us more passionate about the job. At least that's how I feel. I think
Yeah.
that a lot of the times, being an artist, you can never really be sure what success is going to look like, or if you're going to be successful in the way that you want to be. And like, I got this education because I wanted options
Yeah.
and because I wanted to learn multiple different aspects of the industry, and I wanted the creative and the business, and I wanted to learn the marketing, and I wanted to learn the law behind it, and did. And it sucks that unfortunately it somehow makes us less desirable candidates when we got into this in the first place, because we were so like,
Passionate.
yeah, just so passionate and so excited that like, it's not just that I want to sing, it's that like the industry as a whole is so extremely interesting to me that
Yeah.
like any aspect of it I can be in is where I want to be.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think that it somehow makes us not the kind of candidates that people want, when actually I don't think that they understand that we will work twice as hard as everyone else for it.
Yeah. Because we know what it's like, A, and B, I think there's something to be said about someone that's been in your shoes.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the time, it feels like there's a huge disconnect between music business professionals and artists, simply because they have no tangible idea of what that life is like. Um, it's also the same thing as kind of being overqualified for a job. Like, overqualified in general, because we have skills in so many different areas of the industry, but then perhaps underexperienced in
Mm-hmm.
those tiny little specific details that they might be looking for in a role that ultimately have more to do with business operations or marketing than music.
Right.
That's another thing that I feel like I've run into, where I can leverage my artist career, my musicianship, my educational history as much as I can try to in an application. But ultimately, if there are specific mechanisms that I've never interacted with before, I can feel a little intimidating to try to go into that setting and really have to learn on the job. But something we were talking about with Aiden Smith, a little bit later on in the episode is it's okay to learn on the job. And it's okay to realize that you might not check every single box when you're applying somewhere. And you and I have discussed this in last week with imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's 65% of the requirements filled, apply anyway. And I'd rather get 10 no's or ghosts than miss out on that opportunity to get one yes.
Mm-hmm.
It's scary though.
It is really scary. I think it's a really important part of it, especially as women of color. And we've talked about this as well, but like feeling like you're jumping through all of these hoops and you're trying to showcase yourself in the best light and show that you are intelligent and capable and competent and passionate and all of these things, but still not feeling like you've gotten the opportunity to try these things or to get the kind of experience that they want in it. Because creatives don't just do one thing generally. How many singers do we see who are also actors, and actors who are also directors, and directors who are also screenwriters, and always having these multifaceted individuals? It can never be a bad thing to have multiple interests, but the crazy part is it's still in this one industry, and I feel like we're the only ones who, like, this is the only industry
Are
where that
demonized
might be a
for
bad
it.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like if you, I don't know, if you were going into law and you learned entertainment law and sports law and contracts and litigation and like all these other different aspects, that's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Aren't you? Like, going to law school, granted we didn't go to grad school, but like going to law school, the whole point is you learn the entire industry, and then you can figure out what you
What you
want to
want to
hone in
do.
on, right? And that's kind of what we did, but at the same time, like, I don't want to have to choose just one, and I don't think we should have to.
Yeah.
But they've kind of chosen for us in a lot of ways, which is unfortunate. And I think a lot of our like classmates and colleagues feel the same way. And
Yeah.
I've talked to a lot of them who have had to choose between like giving up on their music basically to pursue business stuff because it made them an unattractive job candidate,
Yeah.
or just full sending into music because they couldn't get the rest of it.
Yeah. And then basically having to support yourself teaching intermittently or getting a random day job.
Mhm.
It can feel incredibly overwhelming. I think honestly, like, I would love to do part of the administrative or A&R publishing side of the industry, because I feel that I'm good at it and I'm detail oriented and I enjoy working in that space. But does that mean by any means that I want to give up on myself as an artist? No.
Mhm.
And I think that's unfortunate, because there's a lot of skills that we both have that are being lost on opportunities because of the fact that we are still choosing to believe in ourselves.
Yeah.
That is sad.
I agree.
And I've still considered law school in the back of my head. I've always had a deep interest in politics and law and debate and everything like that. And then, interning at a music publishing company really made me extremely interested in copyright law specifically. So that's always been in like my back pocket, but I'm also like the loans, the testing to get in.
Mm-hmm.
It just seems incredibly overwhelming in a place in my life where I'm already still just trying to barely figure it out. So then taking on the extra burden of like hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt and then probably years of testing and applications, I want to give this like a really good shake before I go down that lane.
Yeah. Understood. And I think that's a good way to go about that. I think law in particular, I keep hearing, myself included, I keep hearing so many artists being like, maybe I should just go to law school.
And it's like, okay, but do you realize what law school entails? I have a lot of friends in law school right now.
I have a lot of friends going to law school.
And they want to do criminal defense or litigation. I just think that it would hurt a part of my soul to have to give up and walk away in order to do that. If anything, I think I have a lifelong goal of at least getting a law degree or at least passing the LSAT, at least trying to go down that lane. But I almost want that as like a secondary career, like into my 40s instead of like my primary source of success,
That's fair.
Kind of how like Kim went back to school and like got her law degree because she's passionate about like criminal defense and like wrongful imprisonment and stuff like that. Kind of how she did it later in life. Obviously she's in a very different situation than I am, but I think in general it just goes to show that if you devote the time and you find success elsewhere, you are able to pursue other things later on.
Most definitely.
All right, guys, I want to move into a quick commercial break before our next segment. Hey guys, welcome back to the Jasmine Ortiz Show. I'm here with Jordy Polycarp and our wonderful guest today, Aiden Smith. Aiden Smith is a very talented audio engineer, producer, bassist, and we're here today to talk to him all about audio engineering and his newfound career as of the past 2 to 3 years in the Bay Area of California. Hey Smith, welcome to the podcast.
What's going on? Thank you so much for having me. It's very good to be here.
Thank you for being on the show. We've been chatting it up, having a good old time a little bit before this, but it's time to get into the nitty-gritty of why we're here and what we wanted to ask you about. So first of all, of course, we've known you like for the better half of 5+ years, but who are you? What is your story? What can you tell our audience?
Man. What I can tell your audience is that earlier when I was like, hey, should I have any questions that you're going to ask me, like pre-prepared? That might have been one.
Give us
your elevator pitch.
Yeah, the elevator pitch of who I am. I think I am, she kind of said, I'm a creative. I think that like what I'm here to do is create, and that covers a bunch of different areas. So I am a bassist. I am a musician. I love music more than anything else, but I'm also an engineer. So I like to mix and I like to code and I like to build stuff. So I'm a creative. I want to create just as a life mission. I think that is the defining thing for me.
That's awesome.
Great. Was that elevator pitch enough?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Did I nail it? Would you sponsor me? Okay, great.
Yes, you connected all the dots very efficiently. I loved it.
Can you tell us a little bit about who in your life inspires you the most?
Oh, man. This is always a hard question for me. I've had a lot of role models that have kind of like let me down later on. Like, it's like, oh, they're so brilliant. And then it's like, oh, but maybe they're not like the best person or, yada, yada, yada. So I think right now there's a guy at work who has become a pretty good role model of mine. His name's Gary Rizzo. And what I appreciate and admire about him is he's very much so an optimizer. So he's a mixer. He mixes movies, and he just like builds out this whole way of like the way he works, his workflow, and he is very intentional about every step and everything he does, making sure that it's as easy and as fast as possible. And when you talk to people, they're like, "Oh, he's so fast! Like he just moves so smoothly." And I really appreciate that about his process and his brain and his workflow, is that he's spent the time and the energy to perfect everything that he does and make it as easy for himself as possible. So that's a current role model that I'm thinking about a lot. But yeah, I don't have anybody that if I would have to say this is like who I want to be, I don't have an answer to that question.
I think that's so interesting, though, what you said, because just going into the specifics of it, I love that idea of being able to hone your craft to the point that you can simplify it for yourself. And I think that's something that, as a person with ADHD, I have not been able to accomplish yet. I know definitely what my skill sets are, like what my strengths are. But I love that, someone was able to hone this entire process of mixing a movie, which seems like a very overwhelming endeavor, especially as someone who's never done it, never been in that world. What does that process look like for him, if he's talked about it with you?
Um, he's talked a little bit about it with me, and I've gotten to see some of it from the outskirts. But it's a massive endeavor. Like making movies is really a huge, huge collaborative team. Like if you've seen a movie, you've seen that credits scroll at the end. Like there's a reason it's that long and that many names. Like it's very different from music in that way. Like music takes a team, but movies take a team.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's interesting is like as the like kind of final sound mixer, like the guy who touches it at the very end, and he does a lot of other stuff. I'm not going to pigeonhole him, but there's a lot of people before that they work with who will like curate. Oh, you want 4 different versions of this sound? Okay, we'll have those ready to go so we can throw them up and find what works best. And there's other people in the room. It's kind of like if you've ever seen Star Trek. Or any show like that where there's like, a spaceship or anything, there's the captain, but there's a bunch of people around them doing different jobs to help keep the whole thing going. Mm-hmm. It's very similar to that. And it's laid out kind of in the same way the rooms are. That's
really interesting. Yeah. I mean, audio in movie productions is so important, and I think it's often overlooked, the work that goes into it. And that's something else I wanted to ask you about with your work on the Lucasfilms Ranch. How has that transformed your mentality when you're going in to watch someone else's work in a film?
Oh man. So as somebody who was not previously a film head, I've only been a music head my entire life. It's totally changed watching movies for me. I care about my sound system now, like for watching movies. Like watching it on a TV kind of bugs me. I'm like, there's stuff here that I can't hear, and I really don't like that it's getting, whatever. And you start to pick it apart in the same way that once you learn music, you're like, oh, that's a cool thing that they did there. That's a cool pre-chorus. You start to kind of dissect the media. You start to do the same thing with movies. You go like, oh, I hear that. I hear this. The thing that really kind of twisted my brain about is that most of the dialogue you hear, or a good chunk of it, is not like recorded when they filmed the actor saying it. It's recorded later. It's voiceover. It's ADR. And that always broke my name. So now I'm always watching for like sync. I'm always watching like,
sync is so important.
It's so important. And so you can really tell it with people speaking because we watch it all day long. So I'm always watching. I'm like, oh, is that real? Is that from the set, or did they do that over? It's given me a different appreciation for the art form for sure, though. What I do find very interesting, though, different from the music industry, when we as artists make music, like we are the art, whereas sound for film, everything is in service to the picture. It is half of your experience. I'm not saying sound isn't important. It's super important, but the goal of the sound is to support the picture, to support the story. So you never do anything that distracts. You never do anything that doesn't convey the right emotion that the director wants. It's a much more service-oriented take on audio and music, which just, is different.
That's so interesting and nuanced, because I don't think I would have really drawn those conclusions as someone on the outside. I mean, obviously I've heard a lot of our friends describe their experience with film scoring as being pretty similar to that. But when it comes to the actual audio, mixing and mastering and compiling all those elements, that's really interesting.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear overall, because I feel like I'm glad that it's changed your like experience overall with film and things like that. Can I ask you, in terms of your overall work, when you're sitting down to complete a mix, either for music or with post-production, what is your thought process like?
Oh, interesting. So I can't speak to this in post production. I do not touch the creative material at my day job. So I can't speak to working on finishing a movie. Finishing a mix, I can tell a little bit more about that. As it goes, and it's funny, I actually had a realization today that's going to inform my mixes in the future, of just like going so incrementally, like here's this 5 seconds, what needs to be perfect in this 5 seconds, here's the next, like very small chunks moving forward, something I'm going to try out, see if I like that flow. But as the song evolves, the first couple of listens through, I'll like listen to the song and stuff just kind of jumps out at me. It's like, this is too loud, this is harsh, this needs to go there. The first thing I always do is kind of panning, putting things where they need to be. And then when it gets towards the end, you start to not like it. You start to go like, oh, I don't like this mix. It sounds really awful. Nothing is fitting quite right. It just sounds like kind of there, but raw. And that's always a cue to myself that like, you're this close. And so then you go from there and you kind of have to hit it with this very fine tooth comb. And really go through and say, I'm listening with the intent of fixing every little small thing that I can hear on these next couple of passes. And then at that point, you kind of have to say, all right, it's good, it's done, and what needs to happen to it next is going to happen in the mastering phase. Or if I'm doing something like that, I'll throw the polish effects on at the end, the multi-bus, the saturator, just say, here you go. Now it sounds pretty good. Okay, I went from like 80% or 85, 90% where I'm like, it's so close, to all the way there. So that's my experience of the mix process a little bit. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, 100%.
Cool.
That makes a lot of sense as well, because I feel like as someone who has mixed a lot of my work, like I think I have adopted your process actually, and how I do that now, because like having seen you do it a lot for my stuff, I feel like I've been applying the same kind of like multi-step process lately. So I like
cool.
This. I feel like it works.
I appreciate it. Thank you. I can't say that I kind of, it's just what happened. It spoke as like, this is kind of how it flows, But cool.
Yeah. What do you think about the importance of the equalization process in audio engineering?
Oh man.
How do you start out with a piece of audio, especially vocals, when you're beginning that mix process? Do you go in initially with an equalizer? Do you go in with a compressor?
Sure. So the first thing that I always do is straight volume and pan. And then if it's a really large session, I do have some like presets that I'll put in. So like I'll cut out all the low frequencies, everything below like 50 hertz, unless it's a male vocalist, and I scoot that down a bit. And that I find cleans out the track a lot. And then some stuff you take out a bit of the highs as well.
The top.
So that's kind of the first step for me, is always volume and panning. The rule that I teach and have been taught is this 3 dB rule for equalization, which is that if you are boosting any frequency more than 3 dB, you need to turn it up. And same thing for cutting, unless you're doing like a really surgical thing, like, oh, there's a resonance or a buzz that I'm trying to cut out. If you're cutting anything by more than 3 dB, you just need to turn the track down.
I see. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
And compressors are interesting. I find that compressors make everything sound great. Sorry, I'm kind of moving here because I spilled my glass, so I'm wiping it out of my rug a little bit. It's okay. It's totally fine. Compressors make everything sound good, right? So everybody wants to put a compressor on everything, but you kind of can't do that. So I try to be very cautious with the compressors myself. And if I'm teaching people, I'm like, hey, really, like if you're going to reach for this tool, have an intended purpose in mind. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know that when I was in school, compression was seen as sort of the tool used to literally compress like a wide scope of highs and lows in an audio file. I guess volume wise or waveform wise. Is that how you would describe it for you as well?
So the best description I had ever heard of a compressor came from Justin Schiavone, who was at school for a brief minute. And he said it's basically a smart fader with transient control. So it's two halves, which is one is, it helps keep things at a reasonable level. So if you're like, oh, this guitar is great, but sometimes it's just a little bit too piercing, I just want to smooth that out. Same thing with like a snare or whatever. And then you get this transient control. So like, for example, basses always need compression because as you develop a mix, you need to be able to control how that transient comes in, how the attack of the bass really hits. And it's a great tool for that. If you have a hard knee and a lot of gain, it'll kind of smack you in the face and then come back. Or if you're like, it's a really kick heavy track, there's a lot of drums and you kind of need the bass to fill out the back end, same thing. Oh, I'm going to squash the front and let the back fill it out. So it's just a smart fader, which allows you to kind of control that attack of the sound.
That's awesome. I love hearing you talk about this. I don't think I've ever had a super in-depth conversation with you about audio, but I love it. It's very interesting.
Thank you. It's fun to talk about. If you want one more compressor thing, people talk about glue all the time, where it's like, hey, you have a bunch of stuff coming into a bus, like, 15 background vocal tracks. You want them all to sound kind of moving as one piece. That's another very different use of a compressor. So, yeah.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I remember learning about buses and how much that changed my use of reverb specifically, because I found that I was able to customize the reverb to exactly the sound that I wanted and then slowly dial it in wherever it was necessary. I think that's such a cool tool, and especially people starting out in production, they don't really know to use that.
I think that reverb is like the trickiest thing. I think that
it can either sound really great or really horrible.
And the line
100%.
of like difference is so small.
Yeah.
So small. I agree. I
and it's
wholeheartedly
also
agree.
super subjective because certain genres just require more reverb, and certain genres like rock, you expect a much drier sort of lead vocal with a tiny bit of reverb to soften the edges, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, how do you strike that balance? And then with pop music, everything feels very round and bubbly and whole and very forward. So you have to think like the reverb needs to be there, but it can't be so distracting that you feel like, you're in this room with high ceilings either. It has to feel present.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Yeah. People say, I've heard, and I never really adopted it, but it's like, if you're going to mix this style of music, you have to listen to just that style of music for a period of time. I've never really adopted that philosophy because I'm kind of like, well, no, like I'm going to mix it to the best of my abilities and it's going to come out sounding like my mix. It's not going to come out sounding like what every other song in that genre sounds like. Not saying reference tracks aren't important. I also wouldn't mix something I'm unfamiliar with. Like I'm not going to say, yes, give me your country song. I can mix that. I can't mix that. I don't know what you want that to sound like. Same thing with metal music.
That's a hard mix. I can imagine.
I actually got clowned one time. I was mixing a show at school. I was mixing a metal show.
What was it? Landfall?
It was Landfall.
Landfall.
And somebody who was a big metalhead shredder guitar player was right next to me. And they were watching me mix, and, it was fine. It sounded okay. And then they were also next to me the next night when I was mixing AME, and like one of a pop group basically at Miami. And they were like, oh man, the other night I really didn't understand what the hype was about you. But now I get it. And I was like, and I was a little bit like exactly that face, like, that's kind of a backhanded compliment. But I went away and I thought about it and I listened to some metal. Yeah, I was mixing it how I mix, but it wasn't metal. And like, I understood. I was like, oh, he's legit. He's like, he was telling me the truth of like, this doesn't sound like how metal sounds. So.
Was it that you were supposed to like boost the mids and lows a little bit more? Is that what they look for? It was a little bit
of that. I tend to, I think a lot of it had to do with the guitars. I kind of keep guitars in like this mid-high rangey area. And he
they want you to cut more of the highs, like boost the mids, especially.
There was like this fatness to the sound that I just didn't understand. Yeah, like way to dunk.
But yeah, I don't think I would get in the ring to actually professionally mix metal, probably not like hard rock, definitely not country. I mean, usually what I like to do the most is vocal production, vocal comping.
Yeah.
just vocal engineering in general I find really fun, especially when I can sit there and actually record someone in person. But oftentimes I've sent vocals to people that I've produced myself, or had someone send me vocals and comped for them and stuff like that. And I think the detail involved in comping is really fun for me.
I could get behind
Same.
that. You like that too? You both like comping?
Oh,
That makes
yeah.
sense. Both
'Cause I
of
feel
you are
like as
vocalists.
yeah.
Yeah,
Because we like to
exactly.
take control of what we are doing.
Yeah.
I feel like on the like EQ discussion, I feel like one thing that also like I learned about my voice from working with you, and I feel like you also know about my voice, is like where those frequencies are, and then how I wanted them changed a lot of the time. And I ended up figuring out that that was because of my like tonsil nostril issue,
Yeah.
because I had gotten my tonsils removed and got a lot of that cleared out, and now my vocal quality is different, and now I sound like what I wanted to sound like before. So I feel like what
that's
we
awesome.
used to
That's
do
so
with my
sick.
what we used to do with my voice was like adding in more like high end and trying to take out some of the bass, because I sounded like I always had a cold, basically.
Yeah.
Because I was always stuffed up, and that's just how my voice carried, because everything was like enclosed. Because my vocal quality and breath quality was at like 40% of what normal people's is what they told me.
Like, did you go to like a pulmonologist and they did the breath test?
I went to like an
thing?
ENT.
Oh, okay.
Like
okay,
ENT,
okay.
I had like a sleep study and all of this stuff, and yeah, and then I had also done a breath test, and they were like, yeah, my overall breathing quality was really bad, but now it's a lot better, and now I sound how I wanted to. But we were trying to make me sound like that through technology.
Yep.
But now my voice sits there because
Do
it
you
has 4
think-
open frequencies.
Do you think we were convincing?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. So
Yeah.
like, yeah. Cool.
Listening back through a lot of them, whatever ones you didn't work on that like I didn't really put EQ on, I was like, I sound like I've had a cold for a month and it's not going away. But I do feel like it changes the quality a little bit, but I feel like we got there most of the time.
Yeah.
So it was cool.
That's cool. I'm very glad to hear that. That's one of the best compliments you could give. And I think vocalists, you have such a hard job because there's so much that goes into it. Like your voice is different on every day. You have to find a mic that works well for you, and it's all about like there's just so much that goes into it. There really is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I hate tuning vocals.
Really?
I do. I'm not great at it is part of this. Like I can do it, but I wouldn't say that I am like really good at tuning vocals. There's some people I know that they're like really good at that. And I hate it. It's so boring to me. It's so time consuming. Yeah.
I feel like I'll rush like all the other elements of my mix except for my vocals.
Yes.
And to be fair, like I don't often do the final mix for my projects. What I'll do is give it a nice, clean, like full sweep through a couple times, and then have a professional do the mix. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%.
But like I love doing the vocals. Like I feel very confident in doing my own vocal recording, comping, tuning, all of that. And I usually like how I do it better than working with some new producers.
Yeah.
So legit.
Aiden, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
In terms of how you listen to music, do you feel like, or I'll rephrase that. In terms of how you listen to music, what are you normally listening for generally? Like, what are the things that kind of pique your interest when you're listening to music? Oh, like recreationally.
Okay. So, I do like lyrics. I love listening for lyrics, but I have to focus to hear the lyrics because most of the time when I listen, I'm like, yes, frequency. So there's songs that like I've mixed your music. I don't know.
You don't know what they're about.
I don't know the words to some, and I experience this all the time. Like I'll work with somebody and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, could you fix the drums right underneath like this line?" And I'm like, sure, and I have to like go listen for the line. I literally just don't even hear that.
I feel so bad because I've definitely said that to so many engineers.
100%, and we don't hear like
Under
that.
the second time that I say I love you this way, I need you to change this one note.
Yeah.
Which is fine. We can do it. We're like, oh yeah, I think that's the chorus, and then we listen for it. And it's fine.
Hunt.
It's a little scavenger hunt.
That's fair.
No, listening, I do love a really good mix. So it kind of depends, man. I kind of listen differently depending on the experience. Tori Kelly just dropped a new album. It's one of my top picks of 2024. I think the whole album is fantastic. And so, like, the first time I listened to it, I just kind of put it on a speaker and I was like, I just want to listen to the songs. It was very casual. But the next time I listened to it, I was like, no, I want to, like, hear it. Let me put it on headphones. Let me put it on speakers. Let me, like, actually listen to this song. I will say I love listening to music on, like, actual speakers because you get, like, that whole thing. I'm working on getting a speaker set for my living room so I can listen to more music like that. But yeah, it is so much for me about the mix. It's so much more about how the song feels, the overall, like, oh, if a song has, like, it could be a great song, great arrangement, but the overall feel of it just, it's not nice to listen to. I can't do it. Like, if it doesn't feel easy to hear, easy to listen to, I don't like it, you know? So
Yeah,
it's a hard question to answer, but I think that's my best guess.
No, yeah, that's great.
what are some of your favorite elements of working on the Lucasfilm Ranch? Like, what have you done in the past few years that you never expected to do?
Man. So I think that the thing that has to go number one is the people. Everybody who is there is like they're very kind, they're an amazing person, and they're all brilliant. Everybody who is there is like at the top of their game. And it's really just like it, you know, there's not a lot of spaces you get to be in life where everywhere you turn, there's somebody making you feel like you need to do better. And it sounds very harsh. And I don't mean it like I feel like nobody makes me feel like a lesser or whatever.
It's a positive push.
It's a positive push. Like I look around and I'm like, that guy is so smart. I don't know how he figured that out so fast.
Veterans in the industry.
Dude, veteran presence is something I had never appreciated. All of the other, I'm kind of on a team of 4 engineers who do my specific job. All of them have been doing this for much longer than I. The youngest one, he's been doing this exact kind of thing for like 8 to 10 years before coming here. And they're just so quick and so smart with it. It's really, it humbles and impresses me almost every day. So the people are by and far like, that's it. That's the best thing. And then coming up underneath that is that I get to do a lot of different things. I'm like we kind of talked about earlier, I'm a creative. I'm not a static person. So if I never wanted to do the 9 to 5 thing, and that is what my work life looks like right now. But if I had to do the same thing every day, I wouldn't. And so the fact that every day I get to work on a slightly different problem, I never know what's really going to be the thing. So some days I get to do some coding. Some days I have to do like testing, set up mics, do this thing. Some days I'm helping out in scoring, doing an actual recording thing. Some days I'm doing something else, you know, like it's always something new. It's always interesting. So I get to be a Swiss Army knife and I get to keep honing these skills that I would have never honed otherwise. And then one more thing on that. Sorry, unless you want to
No,
say
I just adore the fact that you just called yourself a Swiss Army knife. That is so cool. That is such a great, apt description of what you just said. I love that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And that's if I had to describe myself years ago, I would have said I would want to be a Swiss Army knife. I've always said this. That's a great thing about my job. Let me find the thread I just dropped. Smith Army knife. Hey. And then the other cool thing is like you learn all this stuff in school and you like, oh, I know what I'm doing. And you succeed in a very controlled environment. And it's great. And then you go and you hit the real world and it's like, hey, there are so many periphery things involved in making what you know happen. So like there's so many times I've needed to go learn how to use this tiny piece of software to configure one device to do what I needed to do. Or I need to learn about, I had to learn about networking and like internet stuff to do audio things because that's just what the world is nowadays. Didn't know anything about that. So that's the other cool thing about this job is it's really rounded me out because there's all these little things that I had never thought to learn about. No one had ever told me you need to learn this. And it's even down to like, you know how to do this, but you've never done it. So like you technically understand it, but you have no idea how to actually do it. And those all, like, getting to experience all of these different things, so grateful for. Such an incredible part of this job. So it's been such a learning experience for me from the get-go. So those are the two top things. Yeah.
I love that answer, because I think it's really valuable to point out that even though we got such a comprehensive education at Frost, there's still things out there, a lot of things probably, that we don't know how to do. And it's okay as a young professional to go out and learn things on the job. I think so many people are afraid to admit that they still are learning, even people, especially people older than us. So when you're entering any sort of new environment, bless you.
Bless you.
When you're entering any sort of new environment, you're going to be learning the ropes of that place. But the fact that it's been a welcoming environment for that sort of thing is awesome.
No, truly, truly so blessed, so grateful. Like it is an amazing place to work. Anybody who gets a chance to be at Lucasfilm, to work at Sky Sound, to be at the ranch for anything, like, take it, do it.
So I want to ask you, what is something you think every artist should know about audio engineering or sound design?
What is something every artist should know about audio engineering or
so think about someone who has no background in production, engineering, just something that they should know walking into a studio.
Mm-hmm.
Everything matters. Sound is like the ocean. Where the mic is matters. Where you are matters. What the room around you looks like matters. What's in the room matters. The angle of the mic matters. The humidity of the air matters. Like, the product you're going to get is a combination of these 15 different currents and swells and waves all coming together to hit that shore. Like, everything matters. So if you're in there trying to get a sound, get something right, anything that you tweak will make a difference. So tweak everything, try everything, find what works for the sound you're after.
Okay, that was
Thank you.
beautiful.
That was really well put. And I 100% agree.
I would like to say they didn't give me the questions beforehand. That was an authentic
We don't do that.
We like an off the cuff.
That was really well done.
response.
I'm
That
going to
was
have to write that
excellent.
down.
Literally. So I want to go into a quick commercial break before our next segment. Hey guys, welcome back. We're going into our last segment of the show, our community corner. This is where you guys tell us stories or ask us questions that we give you advice on. So this week, we have some interesting questions. This definitely has to do with something that we were just talking about. Someone asked, how important is networking in the music industry? And what are some tips for building meaningful connections? Good question. I think it's probably one of the most, if not the most, important facet of being an artist in this industry, or a creative, period. You have to get good at remembering people, or if you're bad at remembering people like me, write it down and like take screenshots of their social media and put it into like a little list. I mean, Jordy does it better than me. She has like a spreadsheet.
Oh, yeah.
I need to be more organized like that, to be honest.
I'm the kind of person who, because I need to keep all my ducks in a row. The ducks are people. It's definitely networking, and I hate that word for it, because networking always feels like a dirty word, like that it's for your own personal gain, which to a certain extent it is. But I also think that, like, I see it as just making friends, because in the way that, meeting people and building community will always be a good thing, and will always help you in your personal and professional goals, is the kind of thing where other people also want to meet people like you. So I feel like we enter these spaces thinking like nobody wants to talk to me. I'm just bothering people by approaching them. But the thing is, like, somebody who you might see as like above you in whatever kind of career that you want, sometimes it might flip flop. So you might have something that they want at a certain point in time, and because like they didn't see you as worth talking to, now they're missing out on you, and vice versa. So I think that if you're the kind of person who wants to go out and network and things like that, I would say just see it as trying to make friends. Just be normal, because I feel like if people sense that you're exclusively talking to them because you want something from them, then it's very easy to see and people can kind of feel it.
Yeah. 100%. That was the best answer possible.
Thanks. And a spreadsheet.
And a spreadsheet. I need to get on your level with that spreadsheet business.
It started from like a job that I had where like sending emails to people, and a lot of them were like artists or like their managers and things like that. So I had to keep track of who they were just so I could remember to follow up. But also I just ended up putting it into like a master doc of like all of their contacts and the contacts they sent me and like their PR teams and stuff like that. And then it extended into, because most of the people I meet nowadays are artists of some sort. Like I live in New York. I'm like you could throw a brick and it'll hit a model somewhere. And it does happen. I'm like, why did I just meet a model who works at like a churro place? Like, because it happens all the time. So I feel like at least like getting to know people and like reaching out and then like remembering to just like check in on people, because you do want them to be your friends. And like I feel like you should only be talking to people who you genuinely like. And you know, you can network, but I think there will always be people who fit into your vision of the kind of person you want to be that can also help you with your career.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a very good answer.
This question that I got is a very different one from the previous. But this question is seeking closure from an ex worth it?
Ooh. That's a very good question.
Yeah. I don't even know. I think I tend to be, I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but I tend to be the kind of person who always seeks closure from other people. And I think that's maybe not necessarily healthy, because they always say that closure is what you give yourself. But I don't know. Maybe I'm just like, I don't know if it's an entitled thing to like assume people want to talk to you or want to give you closure. But in my experience, I never regret it. Like it might be a little awkward and it might be a little uncomfortable sometimes, but I think it's worth it to know where you stand with people that were an important part of your life. And I think whether that's deciding to cut someone off or needing answers about particular things, I think you'll only learn more about yourself by doing it. But I don't know. It's always weird. It's always uncomfortable for both parties involved. I don't think I've ever done it and haven't not been like, why are we speaking? But
yeah,
sometimes it ends up clearing the air and then we're friends, and then sometimes we never speak again, and that's fine.
I think it can feel really tempting to go back into a toxic situation to get closure. I think if it ended so badly that it would damage your mental health to see the person again, do not do that. That's just not a good idea for your own healing process. However, like Jordy said, if it didn't end super bad and you just kind of are able to have this casual conversation with someone, I think that can help both of you learn to move on more successfully. So I think it really just goes both ways. I personally think if it's been like months to years, like you need to let it go, to me. But then
how
again,
many months?
I mean, I will say, like, I did revisit something once after like 2 years of not speaking, and then I guess I got closure from the situation, but honestly I ended up feeling 10 times worse. So it was like I did feel like I closed the chapter, but at what cost, you know? So it can really go both ways. And then in a different situation, I never got closure. And then I randomly saw this person when I was out in Miami one night. And that was my closure because I looked so amazing that night. I was like, yeah, that's like, the best revenge is just feeling good about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So if anything, that was like a better form of closure for me than the other situation. But
it's an ego boost for sure.
it is. And, sometimes you need that when you're healing from something.
Yeah. I also think that sometimes closure just ends up not being closure, and you just reopen the situation and then you start dating them again. So don't do that.
That's exactly what happened in the first situation I described. Like, it was just adding salt to the wound 2 years later, because then it's like, ooh, we revisited this whole thing and then it ended even worse than the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
So, PSA, if you're seeking closure, you have to mean it. Mean closure. And hold steady in that. Generally.
All right, guys, thank you so much for listening this week. This is episode 11 of the Jasmine Ortiz Show. You're here with Jasmine Ortiz and Jordy Polycarp. We'll see you next week.